Gracias siempre por recordarse de cada uno de los vecinos de esta comunidad. Que Dios los bendiga y que uniendo nuestras manos podemos hacer muchas cosas maravillosas. Muchas gracias y bienvenidos.
So thank you for keeping us in your mind and be blessed and be well.
Tenernos siempre respetarnos siempre y ser.
Thanks for always remembering us and coming back and give us blessings.
And together we will accomplish many marvelous things.
40 people stand in a semicircle around a woman in her 30s. That's Lydia, and a man named Octaviano. Half the people surrounding them are American. The other half were born and raised in Guatemala.
I just want to translate to tell him what you're telling them.
Okay.
So he's telling the people of Guatemala, we come from lots of different places. Some of us are students, some of us come from churches. Scott brings in all these people from different places and different faiths and different churches and coordinates us to come and help them out. I think that's essential.
Okay, yeah.
The Scott they're referring to is Scott Robertson. He's a gentleman in his 60s, average height, white hair, wearing tennis shoes and cargo shorts. He listens intently, smiling politely and nodding, although he's absorbed messages similar to this one too many times to count over the last 15 years. Scott is the connecting thread. He's brought all these people together to this rural Guatemalan community for this very week.
So we're going to work together and enjoy each other, and God will favor us by allowing us to do things for them, but also allowing us to learn and experience new things together with these people.
Entienden muy rápido que la misión es ir y acompañar a los más distantes en su nombre.
So those who understand that, like the disciples, they realize that the mission is to go to where these people are and to be in their name.
Usted le pregunta cómo fue que todo esto empezó, cómo Dios lo llamó y empezó a mover todas las cosas y a mover al grupo para que empezara a llegar acá.
And if you have any doubt, you can approach to Scott. He is 100% Spanish speaker. So he can give you all the details how this mission started and how God called him to come here.
Mi español es muy peligroso.
As they stand together in this remote community under the hot sun, this eclectic group listens and laughs together. A collection of Texas Tech students, a professor, a writer, a few others. What are they all doing here? And what does it have to do with this university? We'll tell you on this episode of Fearless. Let hope begin here. For Scott, being in Guatemala and spending time with this community is second nature. He's been coming here for decades. For others in this group, it's a first, like Haley. She's a writer for Texas Tech Advancement and works closely with our team.
So I'd never really been on a trip like this before, and it was just incredible. And to kind of understand how we all got here, we have to go back to 1974 when a young Scott Robertson, 20 years old at a time, a college student, studies abroad and just absolutely falls in love with studying internationally and serving internationally. And over time, he just kept feeling this desire to go back and keep doing it. And this passion is ultimately how the idea of Let Hope Begin Here, Guatemala got started.
Can you tell us a little bit about what the Texas Tech connection is?
So Scott's been working with the university for about a decade now, and he's a 2-time alum from Tech, got his master's and doctorate in psychology from here. And when he created this foundation and began this work in Guatemala, he just knew the expertise and resources that we have here at Tech. But he's also had this passion, and he's extremely dedicated to opening students' eyes of how they can use the education they get here to help others, especially those who would have never had access to this help otherwise.
And how are the Texas Tech students that are serving on this trip, how are they selected? How are the faculty members that are on this trip? How did they find Scott?
Mm-hmm. Well, really, it's Scott finding them. How he makes those decisions is based on what those communities in Guatemala need. Previously, there were structural needs, so he connected with professors in the Huckabee College of Architecture and those in the Whitaker College of Engineering. In those cases, he found the professors best suited to those needs, and then they selected graduate students or came themselves to kind of fit to those projects. But Scott also knew for this trip, we're going to need something a little different from what he'd done before. There were some really strong dietary and nutritional needs. So he reached out to professors in the College of Health and Human Sciences, which connected him to Dr. Wilna, who specializes in community nutrition in low-income communities. So just really a perfect match for what he needed. We landed in Guatemala City and then drove to Chiquimula, Guatemala, which is about 2 hours from Guatemala City. And so then we get to Chiquimula and take another 45-minute drive down a dirt road to this teeny tiny community called Guayvales. There were some people in our Texas Tech group, like Harrison and Ahmed, who honestly really felt at home.
Me originally, when I was a kid, I grew up in Honduras until I was 7, especially the place that my parents are from. I mean, it was more developed because we had electricity, but I mean, it's like a few days out of the week.
Harrison is a nutritional sciences and dietetics major, and before he came to the U.S. with his mom, he spent part of his childhood in Honduras. And then the other young man by the name of Ahmed is a doctoral student in electrical engineering, and he's originally from Egypt.
So my first impression was like, oh man, this is a lot like Egypt. I was like, wow, this is the same feeling I get every time I come out of the airport in Cairo.
Ahmed tells this story about coming to campus as an undergraduate in 2018. He's a bright-eyed student showing up in Lubbock, Texas, and like a lot of other international students we have here, he really just wants to learn and grow and then take that educational experience back to his home country, back to Egypt, to help them build up their infrastructure and do his part to make his home a better place.
I can imagine myself, when I'm done with my PhD, going back home and doing the same thing. Maybe not the exact same thing, going up mountains because we don't have volcanoes, but I will give back somehow. And I will feel this rush and excitement. So when we got to the village and I got to meet the people, I was like, yes, these are just like the people back home. We're all the same. We're all trying to get through all of this. We're trying to help each other. So I was just filled with this. And I had this conversation with Dr. Robertson later. Is the feeling that you are helping people and you're giving what has been given to you. I was part of this community. I was part of, humanity as a whole, and it felt like it all fit together.
Within the community, it's amazing how quickly we were able to connect. We were with them all day. And that's really Scott's whole vision for these projects that he does through his foundation is he's always said, I want to go into these communities and learn from them. They should be the ones to tell us what they need. They don't need Americans coming in and telling them, this is what we think you should do.
And so once he starts kind of having those conversations, he develops the sort of structure of this trip. And from what I understand, it's kind of divided up into, 2 different groups. Is that right?
Yeah, we had a clinical group and a construction group. The construction group was focused on our building projects, manual labor, and some things you would think of like that, providing infrastructure to these communities. This group they're 20 miles from the nearest big city, and transportation is unreliable, to say the least. This area is extremely remote. In fact, the only way to get to this village is by crossing a bridge, and that bridge is old. It was incredibly dangerous, and during the rainy season, it was just expected that like 5 to 10 people would die trying to cross this bridge to go to town and get food or medical supplies.
Water systems to clean up the tanks.
Vamos a trabajar con el sistema de agua, limpiar todos los tanques.
We will be teaching home gardening.
Vamos a enseñar cómo tener huertos en sus casas.
We will have a clinic.
Vamos a tener también la clínica con la consulta médica.
We will also have classes on emergency first aid.
También vamos a tener el curso de primeros auxilios.
That was just one of the projects. And some of the other ones they had were figuring out how to run electricity and internet to this particular community in Guayavales. What would that look like to try to get solar panels out to these desolate areas? And that was one of Ahmed's primary things that he was doing. He worked a lot with Christian, a gentleman who's originally from Guatemala, now living in Houston, who comes back with us and just is a huge asset. And they were trying to figure out just the logistics of how they can actually make this work.
I wanted to know, after it's set up, inshallah, God willing, how would they pay for the subscription, or what it's called? Like, how would they pay for the electricity?
Oh, okay.
Do we need to fundraise for that too? Do we need to find a stream of income?
They're hoping that these computers in the schools will obviously provide a better education for students, but like everything else, that is an uphill battle. Culturally, school in Guatemala is not, just not the system we know here in the States. So the children's education is inconsistent and unreliable. And for these families, if they want to go to school beyond 6th grade, it's expensive. The kids are educated in their communities, required by the government to have a teacher until 6th grade. And then after that, if they want to pursue a further education, they have to pay $500 a semester. These are communities living on $1 a day or less. So even if they have the money, it doesn't even answer the hardest question of how do they get to the school, which is in that town that's 20 miles away.
We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Thomas Boyd, and I edit this podcast. You hear my voice on here from time to time, but the other part of my job with marketing and communications is to help tell visual stories. Last year, I created a video featuring the story of a young woman named Lindsay Doobie, who participated in an experiential learning class called Adventure Media, which you might remember from Season 3. She took on this physically demanding challenge while living with muscular dystrophy. And this story, in a lot of ways, really embodies the grit and toughness that we feel represents the Texas Tech spirit. To watch Lindsay's story and many more like it, subscribe to her YouTube channel. Just search Texas Tech University.
These computers, from what I understand, would be dual purpose, right? So you talked about the educational advantages for the kids in the area, but what else are they trying to use them for in these communities?
Their second purpose would really be for telehealth. Many of these people don't have the ability just to go see a doctor if they need to. So another important need Scott's group is trying to meet is by getting this technology into these areas is that medical need. And it's a very clear need based on what I saw with the clinic group.
And it's life-changing what Scott and this group have the opportunity to do for the people in that community.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You had talked about there's two halves of this. We talked about the construction group just now. What about the clinical group? What are they doing?
We set up and we had 3 different medical professionals with us who saw patients. And when we would go into these communities, the line is literally out the door, down the road. There's just you can just see that the people want this kind of help. And that group is also, the other half of health besides the doctor is taking care of yourself and feeding yourself, right? And that's where Dr. Wilna and her students came in and did a lot of nutrition and wellness work, particularly with the women in the community. One person I really got to see just thrive in these conversations was Savannah. Savannah's from El Paso, finished her undergraduate degree in May, and she was one of Dr. Wilna's students. Savannah grew up in a dual language home and was completely fluent. This particular woman Savannah was talking with and her professor, she was talking about what food they have access to and, you know, what they would like to add to their diets if they could.
I guess it's more of just finding a way to add more nutrition to what they're already eating because their portions are small. They eat about 3, depending on the person, 3 to 5 times, but I'm assuming that's because the portions are small. Eggs, when they have eggs, coffee and tortillas in the morning.
Do they add sugar to the coffee?
Cuando toman su café, le echan azúcar. O así, y leche también. Sí. Y cuando le echan azúcar, ¿es mucho o es un poquito? O medio. Medio, like in the middle.
They're planning to help them create a garden. So one of the primary things is they don't have access to a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables, which, as we know here, is a core component of any healthy diet. And so they were using that information to gather and see, you know, what would be palatable to them. And then on the other hand, they're also going to be creating some educational materials for these communities, all in Spanish. And what's in addition to some picture graphics, because you go back to education, not all of them are fully literate. And the goal with both of these projects is to teach them about the importance of quality nutrition. But beyond that, it's giving them access to what will make a difference. And this is Wilna's life work. She talks about it in really plain terms. And that partnership between Scott and Wilna and Texas Tech and these students, you know, if these students were anywhere but Texas Tech, they wouldn't have been with this group on this trip and having this experience.
Growing up in poverty, you become food insecure because you cannot access food. The result of that is being malnourished. If you are malnourished, you cannot cognitively develop as well as you can. What happens? When you grow up, you're in a low-income job because you did not have all the opportunities again, and this whole poverty cycle just repeats itself. So my mission is to break the poverty cycle through the projects that I'm doing.
So Scott has this expression that he uses a lot.
Yes. It's his number one Scottism. You often hear him talk about how in life, sometimes these completely unconnected events will come together in just really seamless ways.
He kept using his catchphrase.
He calls them moments. I don't remember what he exactly calls them.
1 in a million chances.
What are the chances?
He calls them his what are the chances moments. And from the very beginning of this journey to create his foundation, Let Hope Begin Here Guatemala, he just kept experiencing these moments where he felt like everything aligned in a way that he didn't understand and couldn't have predicted. This same phrase kind of forced us all to look at the opportunities around us and in front of us. And so many of these students had breakthrough moments on the trip where they just saw their academic goals and dreams start to evolve or shift in real time.
Coming in, I was thinking, well, I would love to have my dissertation be about this somehow. And I was talking to Dr. Scott about that. I was like, how can I shift and have all what I'm investing in the next few years? Because I'm doing my PhD in machine learning, but I would love that to service people eventually, not just like create a paper and move on.
And I mean, that just aligns perfectly with what Scott was trying to do on this trip, not just for the people of Guatemala, but the students that came with him. He doesn't want it to be just good for 1 year, 2 years, 5 years. He wants to make sure he's created something sustainable that the next generation can take on and improve over the next 20 years. This desire feels inherently Texas Tech to improve the lives of others in a way that lasts. And what's amazing, but not necessarily surprising, is Ahmed isn't the only one from this trip who came back with that conclusion.
Inherently Texas Tech, meaning permanent, essential, characteristic. Some of these students were changed on this trip. Ahmed changed his thesis to investigate bringing technology to underdeveloped parts of the world. When they got home, Sarah and Savannah immediately committed to going back to this same community for the next 5 years, to continue doing Scott's work. They wanted to complete the projects that he had worked years to start. It's funny to think about all that can happen when you decide that taking a chance really is worth it. That maybe taking a step outside your comfort zone will lead you to the right conversation, the right introduction, and a lifetime of those moments where you ask yourself, what are the chances? Fearless is produced by Texas Tech Marketing and Communications. It's hosted and written by me, Taylor Peters, with special help in this episode from Haley Aramusby. It's co-produced by Allison Hirth, and Thomas Boyd is our audio engineer. He does sound design and edits this podcast. If you'd like to learn more about the characters we talked about in today's episode, go to ttu.edu/fearless. And don't forget to follow Texas Tech University on social media. Fearless is a Texas Tech production. From here, it's possible.